Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine presented by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and an honor to bring this to you across the Commonwealth and, of course, online and our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio on YouTube, and you'll find previous episodes of the program. And if you go to tertiumquids.org, find out about so much of our other work off the scenes and behind the scenes where we influence, as I once told somebody, we're not a think tank, we're a do tank here at the Virginia Institute. First up this week, a follow-up. We talked a little bit last week about school choice, and the D.C. scholarship program came up. Joining us from the Heartland Institute, director of the Education Center, there is Lennie Jarratt. Lennie, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
No, well, thank you for doing what you're doing. And I've always marveled doing a radio show on a daily basis. It's always new things, and sometimes my frustrations come from I don't feel like there's enough time to spend in each particular topic. But when you're focused in on one topic, I'm sure at some point it must feel frustrating that we haven't achieved more movement. And do you ever get a chance to look back at where we are today versus where we were 10 years ago and say, okay, we have made some progress, maybe not as much as we would like, but at least we're getting somewhere?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes it takes quite a while. I know I was helping you down in Tennessee last year. Actually, this year. Time has been flying. But they've been working on education savings accounts and stuff, what they just passed this year, for 12 years. Mm-hmm. So they're really, it really is a long game, and we're making slow progress as we've done. And one of the things I've said here too, a lot of the conversation has begun to shift. 5-10 years ago, it was, does school choice really work? Do we need school choice? To now it's, okay, what type of school choice programs actually work now? What can we be implementing? So the conversation has started to shift some. And of course, with that now is a huge pushback from the other side, from the teachers' unions and those that oppose actually giving kids a choice.
Well, and of course, that always seems to be it. And it's never about the kids, which has always frustrated me. Our discussions about school choice are about the parent and the child. And we always seem to be up against people who wrap themselves in some sort of false flag of being there for the children when really they're not. We're just trying to help a mom, a dad, sometimes a single mom and dad, make better choices for their kid. And that's one of the things that struck me in last week when the subject of the D.C. scholarship program came up. This was a program that had poor inner city kids going to school with the daughters of the President of the United States. How can that be a bad program? Yet the progressive left wanted to pull the plug on it even then. So what is going on now? You wrote a great piece about the introduction of child safety account legislation. What is going on? Catch our listeners up if they haven't seen your piece at heartland.org.
Yeah, well, basically, the child safety accounts was a concept we came up with here after the shooting in Parkland last year. And there's more to the student safety and stuff than just school shootings. There's bullying that's occurring every single day. Mm-hmm. Nearly 80% of schools in this country have a bullying problem. And bullying itself affects over 21% of all students in a school year.
Wow.
So 1 out of every 5 students is being bullied either once or twice or regularly, a lot of them very regularly over the school year, and you have 160,000 kids skipping school every day just to avoid bullying. This problem is affecting our educational outcomes and stuff, and D.C. has a lot of bullying. Thankfully, Virginia, so you're pretty good. You're ranked 45 in bullying, so your bullying numbers are way down compared to others, but D.C. has a problem with this, and this is kind of where we've worked with Congress, Representative Jim Banks, actually, to introduce the child safety account. And what it is an education safety account that the money goes to the parent. The parent then decides what education best fits their child rather than it going to a district. That's kind of the problem we see. The money that teachers union believe that the money belongs to the school district when it should be about the kid. We should be about funding an education for a child to make sure they're properly educated. And that's kind of where we focus on and why we think child safety counts is a really good idea, because it's helping those that are the most vulnerable, the kids that are being bullied, the kids that are victims of violence that need an escape from where they're at so they can actually be educated.
Well, and it sounds like you found a way to get a direct voucher program, at least in specific cases, available to parents where they can take the monies used to educate their children. In Virginia, where our idea of school choice is still government run. If you pass, muster, and the government decides that you're, part of the right targeted class, we'll give you something that really comes from tax abatements for business owners. Which I've seen, and I watched it, and I watched Virginia walk away from the school choice issue, saying, "There, that's it, we're done." But a real voucher where a parent can take the monies that would be spent on educating their kids and spend it in a different school, I think is very, very important. So what has the reaction been, the pushback on this?
Typically exactly what you expect, and what we see a lot of times. People claim that it's just we're trying to privatize the education system, and that's the biggest pushback we get every single time we talk about this or introduce this. And it's like, no, we're actually focusing on the child, not the district. We want to protect children to make sure they have the access to a quality education. And people just don't kind of want to see that. For the pushback we get is the people that oppose it don't want to see this. They want to keep their monopoly public schools going. And my first question to them always is, all these kids are going to leave. And I'm like, so you're telling me that your school is that bad that if parents have a choice, they're going to parents are going to pull their kid out of your child? I'm like, why aren't you asking yourself what's wrong with your school then?
Right.
I don't believe they're going to pull every kid out. History shows they're not going to anyway.
Well,
but it's like,
history has also shown us that if there are populations that go down, that actually benefits. I think it was Milwaukee who years ago did a voucher program and found that not only did the kids who were able to opt into a private school situation did better, but those who were, pardon the phrase, left behind in the public schools, those kids did better as well.
Yes, the kids that chose to stay in the public school they were in did better as well, and they like to play with statistics and try to say, well, those kids aren't doing better than the kids that left aren't doing as well as the others. It's because everybody improved, and we see that all over the country in all of these studies. The same thing happens. It gets better. Every kid gets better, including Washington D.C. is the same way.
So, what is you mentioned one of my favorite discussions about this is, well, you're just trying to privatize education. Okay, make the argument beyond just sloganeering and fear mongering. If you say, and I believe Virginia's Constitution guarantees access to education, because otherwise you'd have teachers going to jail all the time for a kid that fails English or doesn't show aptitude to read. You didn't get that kid reading. You got to go to jail. So how does this not fit into an educator's mindset? Have we so brainwashed the educator that they're just a clerk who's filling out forms?
On a lot of respects, yes. There are still some good teachers out there that really want to help their kids learn, but they're getting so inundated with the message, this is taking money from our public schools, so you're losing money, you're not having the money that you need to educate, when in fact the exact opposite is true. If they just look at the numbers, when a child leaves through a voucher or through an education savings account or through a tax credit scholarship, for the majority of the time, that's only part of the money that the public schools are getting. So the district is then getting money where they don't have a child now to educate. So they're actually increasing their per pupil expenditures. The money per pupil actually increases every time a student leaves because of a school choice program. If people looked at the math, they would actually see that and realize that education choice programs are actually helping the traditional public schools at the same time, and just But it really is coming from the unions. The opposition is coming from the unions because that money, that they can take all that money, that means they can hire more people, they can hire more administrators, they can hire more union workers so that they can then pay. It's really about, I call them friends and family programs for most school districts. And we've got to get away from that mentality and start funding the children and not the district.
Well, do the rank and file teachers, and I use that union parlance intentionally, Lennie, and we're talking with Lennie Jarratt from the Heartland Institute. Great piece up there, and he, of course, is the education director there, and these child safety accounts. But the rank and file teacher, and it still puzzles me that the most important job in an educational institution is teacher, and yet that's where our entry-level employees go. We hire somebody right out of school, and you're in the classroom, because the promotion is to get out of the classroom rather than, as you've proved to be a good educator, you get to more responsibility, or you get to be a more thorough teacher. But do the teachers at the low end of the food chain realize they're getting paid barely enough to live in most of these communities, and they're the ones really getting the short end of the stick, both resource-wise, and if they go out and fight for these anti-school choice programs, they're actually gentrifying their own possibilities in the future.
Yeah, they really are, and I think that's part of the fear mongering that goes in with the unions. They're like, because these young teachers come in and they haven't had tenure because they haven't been there 3 to 4 years. Every place is different on the tenure rules. Yeah. But if they haven't established themselves, they have to just keep their mouth shut and do what they're told, basically. Yeah. And a lot of them do that out of fear. Then you get some that have broken free and don't want to do that anymore. Rebecca Friedrichs is an example. Larry Sand is another example that walked away from the unions. They tried working from the inside the unions. They tried working on the outside the unions, and they were attacked over and over and over again, but they had the fortitude to walk away. And it is really, really hard for a younger teacher especially to buck the union. Mm-hmm. They're going to sit down and do what they're told for the most part. I mean, we have a teacher here that works for us now. He taught history for 5 years down in South Carolina and finally got so fed up with it, he came to work here to help us out, to help combat the issue, because he saw how bad it really was inside the system, and he just couldn't take it anymore. He had to get out.
Well, it's the whistleblower or the insider information. Thank goodness for him and those who are standing up to really, truly try to help the kids achieve. So your plan is, I guess, if enacted, it will give parents the opportunity then to go to the school board and say, my kid's being bullied systemically in the school. I want him or her out. And I'm sure, especially through middle school and high school, sexual harassment can wind up being part of this as well. And you said, of course, the usual suspects have marshaled against you. Who's marshaling for it, so we can give them the courageous words of, like, keep going, keep fighting the good fight?
Well, there are several organizations that are really helping out. The Heritage Foundation, and one of them there in D.C., has a really good influence in Congress, so they're really helping us a lot. Then the Cato Institute there as well in D.C., and around all the states, all the state policy network groups are helping, but they're working in their own state. But so just in D.C., it's Heritage and Cato for the most part helping us and working there with Congress to try to push things along. It's an uphill battle. Given the makeup of Congress right now, it's going to be virtually impossible to pass it through. But we're going to keep trying and keep pushing because kid safety is more important. I mean, you brought up sexual harassment. Actually, grades 7 through 12, about 48% of students are sexually harassed. This was a survey from back in 2010, 2011 school year. So almost half of the kids were sexually harassed at some point during their 7th through 12th grade.
My wife homeschooled all 3 of my kids through middle school because the middle schools in our little college town have such a bad record. And my daughter specifically, we were warned that, by parents who had their daughters assaulted sexually in school, and the response was, "Oh, boys will be boys," as if this was happy days and it was the 50s and it's the Fonz and it's okay. Girls are just there to be oogled and googled and groped in the hallway, and I'm like, well, my daughter's going to blacken somebody's eye if they do that, and then I'm going to be in the office for that as well. So,
Yep.
So it was just more for my own sanity. But she obviously didn't suffer any of the ill wills of everyone says, oh, these homeschool kids are antisocial or whatnot.
Yeah.
But
I know.
Does this also? And I know that Blaine amendments are often one of those standard procedural things that are thrown. Well, we have a law against giving money to Catholic schools, and it's separation of church and state, and Jefferson, and all of a sudden they want to bring Jefferson back into the fold when it's convenient.
Of course.
And even here in Virginia, we have the grandfather or founding father of them all, the Virginia Act for Religious Freedom. But by giving it to the parent, is this finally making people realize that that's not what's happening? Maybe the parent does give it to a parochial school eventually, but it's the parent's choice, not some bureaucrat somewhere?
Exactly. It's not the government's not giving the money to the Catholic school. It's the parent giving the money to the Catholic school. The parent's making the choice. And we already have this system working. You look at higher education, the parents are choosing and going to private colleges all the time, and they're getting grants, they're getting Pell Grants, they're getting government loans. All this money is going to private and religious colleges and universities all the time.
I
Same
hadn't
thing
thought of
with
that.
Medicaid and Medicare. That money's going to Catholic hospitals.
True.
It's the same thing. The money's going to parents or to the patients. The patients is the one paying and making the selection. The problem with the Blaine amendments is if the government is making the selection, and this isn't the case for any of this.
Mm-hmm. What about the other aspect of this school issue? And to me, this is a compelling one as well, is the racial issue of redlining, and we see it with our property taxes and funding our schools off the back of property tax collections in and of the first place creates sort of a soft core redlining that still exists in areas. Doesn't this kind of kneecap all that too? So if anyone out there is an anti-racist, to borrow from Dr. Kendi's book, truly speaking, this would be something you'd want to support to blow up that kind of redlining that still goes on.
Oh, exactly. I mean, segregation is coming back within the public schools. The school districts are trying to split themselves up smaller and smaller into districts so certain students aren't allowed in that school district. And that's really what school districts allow. When they talk about public schools, a school district isn't a public school. A public school would mean anybody could go to that school no matter where they live. Mm-hmm. That's not the case. They're district schools. They're mapped off. You can't go into them. You just can't. You can't attend that school. If you do, you got parents going to jail because they're falsifying records to try to get their kid into a better school in a better district.
Committing
so
fraud.
They're not truly public. They're public schools. They are district schools. So, and that's really the case. School choice will actually help integration and help the diversity within schools. Actually, if you go back and look, some of the things actually in Virginia, when you look back at the segregation issue in Virginia and how they wanted to shut down schools, and they actually thought then school choice back in the 50s and how they wanted to do it was going to help continue what they thought it was going to break up the schools and integrate the schools.
So they were
fighting against school choice back in the 50s there in Virginia to prevent integration.
And we have a statue to that guy outside the Capitol, and nobody ever protests that statue. But it's always a head-scratcher. Good old Harry Byrd and the bad old days of the Jim Crow-era laws and the mass resistance here in Virginia. But that's interesting that they were, even back then, this is how long they've been fighting the idea of a parent choosing where their kid can go to school. And really, fiscally speaking, it's economically sound as well. I was talking about this with, of all people, our governor at the time, whose name was Tim something, Kane, I think. He's still around somewhere. Yeah. So Governor Kane and I went down the numbers and how much less expensive it is to go after, educational issues in first and second grade and start the kids off right, rather than coming back in high school and trying to fix educational issues that have just kind of festered for 7 or 8 or 9 years.
Yep. I mean, the schools, that you can watch this whole thing and this phenomenon, the studies about school choice and kids that are able to get out, the earlier they're able to get into a school where they can be educated properly, the better they do, the higher rates they go to college, the higher rates they graduate. It actually reduces teen pregnancies. It reduces actual crime. And this is shown over and over again throughout the country in studies over and over. So, yeah, I grew up in Southern Virginia, so I kind of know Virginia a little bit. Actually, the father of my state senator when I was growing up, Senator Gray, was one of the ones back in the 50s that actually tried to prevent integration by wanting to shut down the public schools they wouldn't have to even integrate.
Well, it's amazing that we still, and we're protesting Robert E. Lee's statue and not Harry Byrd's statue, who sort of ran the machine back in the days of, Senator Gray and these folks. It's amazing.
Exactly.
But the black community has been told that these white politicians are going to help them somehow, rather than giving them the money to help themselves. And that's really one of the things I find so compelling about the D.C. Scholarship program, is it does help the poor inner city single moms, to let their kids, as I said at the onset, it's not hyperbole. Sasha and Malia complained to their dad that he was about to cut a program that was going to kick half their friends out of school. Here are poor kids going to school with the daughters of the president. How is this bad? That's to me.
It's great. I mean, it should be something that we all celebrate. It should be a completely bipartisan issue, and it is in a lot of states, but not all states. It's not a bipartisan issue, and it should be. The focus should be on the child themselves, not on the adults running the school districts.
Now, I know they were off limits during the 2008 campaign, but now it just struck me, and I'm spitballing completely off the cuff here, Lennie. Could we reach out to Sasha and Malia Obama and see if they wouldn't become an advocate? Wouldn't that kneecap the hell out of the teachers' unions if Sasha and Malia Obama became voices for school choice?
That would be a lot of fun, actually. That would be a very interesting endeavor to see if that could happen.
I mean, they've seen it firsthand. If anyone has done anything for school choice programs, they perhaps are the most famous ones. But you and me, we will continue to do what we do. Lennie, again, you read his stuff at heartland.org. Lennie Jarratt, director of the Education Center at the Heartland Institute. And here in Virginia, 2019, every seat in our General Assembly is up for election. Some of them aren't contested, but every office is under contest, and somebody will be voting in November. Ask the folks in your district, ask the members of the General Assembly, ask the state senators, where do you stand on school choice? And if their answer is, we did that years ago, they're lying to you. If anything, what they did is, you ever kiss your sister? It's not the same thing. And so the expression is a truism. Don't let them get away with it. Make it a big issue here in Virginia. We keep trying to. Lennie, thank you for helping us in that. You have a wonderful weekend.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's great talking to you.
Absolutely. Coming up next, one of our favorite people, author of The Amazing Pigness of Pigs and the more recent Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, a local farmer turned activist, one of the great libertarian minds in agriculture, Joel Salatin, next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.